Díomh gach daoine agus fáilte go dtí a cad of brethbh is Mr. Cuivín O'Flanagan, and oh my God, do I have a great show lined up for you tonight. I'm going to be speaking to Jim Fitzpatrick, the well-known Irish artist who's based out of Howth. And if you don't know who he is, you will by the end of this interview. I'm going to flash up some of his artwork throughout the interview. And I think if you haven't heard of him, but when you see his pictures, you probably will know who I'm talking about and why this is such a big interview. I mean, Jim Fitzpatrick followed me on Instagram and I just chanced my arm and I reached out to him. I said, hey, would you be interested in doing an interview? And he was sure. And I have to say, like, it was kind of like he's not a man of many words in his text messages. So I was kind of worried about how would the interview go. But once once he got started, he was quite talkative, and that's okay, you know. That's kind of what I wanted. That's what I was hoping for. So I'm really happy with how this interview has turned out. Now, before I jump into the interview, just remember to check out the breenacademyorg. That's where you're going to find all of my online courses. You're going to get access to my blog articles over there as well. Don't forget to follow us on social media. So we're on Facebook, we're on X, we're on Instagram, and we're on YouTube. And that reminds me, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please hit subscribe now. With all that being said, I can't wait to jump into the interview with Jim Fitzpatrick. So, Jim, I'm very glad that you've given me the time this afternoon to talk about your work. I think you're a man that doesn't need much introduction. I was out for lunch with a friend the other day and I said, guess who I'm going to be interviewing this week? I said, Jim Fitzpatrick. And he goes, oh, is that the artist? So I'm sure people have heard of you and I'm sure they're familiar with your work. But just for those who may not have heard of you, who are you and what do you do?
I'm obviously an artist. I'm self-employed, independent. I'm 81 and no pension, but I live by the skin of my teeth with the help of my son who runs my website. He's here right now doing stuff for the website.
Excellent. And you said you're 81 and that's a fine age to reach.
Great age. We didn't expect to be here at this age.
Yeah.
Total surprise and shock to me.
So I'm going to do something that you might not have expected and ask you to talk about your childhood because I'm curious to know when did this journey begin for you? I'm imagining it began when you were in school. So maybe you could talk a little bit about those times.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Drumcondra, Glasnevin. My father legged it when I was 5. We went from being super rich to super poor. I was homeless for a couple of weeks and then we were taken in by relatives. I went to school in Pat's Drumcondra, which is a wonderful school back
I went
then.
to school there as well.
Did you?
Yeah,
Yeah, well, you missed the Victorian version of it.
right. Yeah.
I loved it there. There was no Victorian building, and they had all the. I always remember the heaters because obviously that's where we sat most of the bloody time to get warm. There was no heat at home, no heat anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Fire, and that was it. But no, to me, it was a very hard childhood for my mother, but a great childhood for me. I was like loads of friends on busy streets, and they were all traffic free. Woodville Road, St. Michael's Road, St. Malachy's Road, all those little roads off Botanic Avenue. And then I've ended up with my mother then eventually on our own in a flat opposite Botanic Gardens over Cecil Vine Bookies. And what's weird is I was following a guy that my son is really interested in called Dark Transmissions. And my son has just bought his T-shirts. And when he was buying stuff, it always came from America. So I presumed he was American. So one day I contacted him and I heard the most extraordinary stuff that made my hair stand up. He was sitting in the same apartment, right? It wasn't an apartment, it was a flat,
Yeah.
above a bookie shop in Glasnevin. It was number 189. And I said, that's exactly where I lived. And I said, I used to sit on that couch with a board on my knees drawing. And he said, that's what I do now. Isn't
That's
that
amazing.
weird?
That's
I
really
thought it
weird.
was in
Yeah.
America, you know?
Yeah.
I'd only had my photograph taken. I have a best friend who wanted to do the circuit there because her dad came from that area, and we went all over the place. And I got a great photograph of myself taken outside with the yes referendum sticker on their door, right? And I just thought, you couldn't make that up. And it turns out his girlfriend is very strong on that issue as well. And I worked on that issue.
Yeah.
There was just all kinds of weird coincidences. I thought, of all the places in the entire effing world that this guy could have been from, 189 Botanic Avenue was not what I'd expect. You know what I mean? No,
Yeah.
Botanic Road, sorry, it's the one off Botanic Avenue, Botanic Road.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And
So my life was kind of like that, full of these weird connections, and yet I've no idea why. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well, it's like the old saying goes, you can choose to see that everything is magic or nothing is.
Well, everything is fucking right. My best friend who I'm with, one of the reasons we went there is her dad grew up in the area. But what was extraordinary was she's now my best friend for so long. She's 50 years old now. But when she was around 17, 18, her mum took her out to meet me here and we got to be great friends. She kind of adopted me, if I want for a better word, as someone to hang out with all the time. And we still do the same. And it turned out her dad, I lived in a cul-de-sac in Drumcondra. You know Talca Park, the entrance?
Yes.
Big entrance now, the
Yes.
first, right opposite that's the laneway. And in that laneway is a cul-de-sac and there's four houses.
Yeah. I think I
I
know what
lived,
you're talking about.
yeah, well, I lived on one corner with my mum in a flat owned by a woman, a mad woman from fucking Roscommon, I'll never forget her, who was in touch with the fairies and all. Listen, I have a great story on the banshee because it's the only time I've ever seen a banshee, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, uh, it turned out my best friend's father lived in the other house. So I lived there. My ex-wife, who I married, lived across the road, right? There was a mad family called the Brady's beside us, right? Who saw fucking little green man running everywhere at night. And then opposite him was my friend's father on the same fucking road. And then my daughter moved into a house in Church Road in the East Wall. And my best friend's mother lived just opposite there. It was all like, how many coincidences can you fit into one friendship?
Yeah. How many coincidences before it becomes mathematically impossible?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember thinking, that's the reason she's coming back here at the end of the month. Oh no, yeah, the end of this month, 28th. And she said, "Do you know what I want to do? I want to do a tour of the old places." Now she
Yeah,
never
yeah,
experienced them. She's no experience of any of it.
yeah,
But she knows it from her dad, and her granddad lived up on Whitford Road. And I have all these fascinating connections with people. Like in the corner of where I lived in Woodville Road, there's a hairdresser now. It's a real mad character. He's a metalhead. And I got talking to him, and that used to be where I used to hang out with my mates. We sit on the windowsill at Thornton's shop. You know what I mean?
yeah,
He's invited me now to go in there and meet some of his mates and have a cup of tea and all the rest of it shall do. But it's just you go back to these places and there's still all these weird coincidences going on.
yeah. And how did these early experiences shape your creative style?
I was everybody who I've ever met. I met a woman who knew me when I was, what, 13, 14, and I haven't seen her since. And she said, all she remembers is me drawing, drawing, drawing. And I have a thing in my head. When I became a teenager, I found that by drawing pop stars, girls kind of took to me. I'd give them a pop star drawing of Adam Faith or Elvis Presley or James
Yeah,
Dean. They're three good ones that I could do well. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But I think as artists, somebody described artists as being like peacocks. Psychologists about 20 years ago came up with this conclusion that peacocks show all their feathers to the female. And we're the same. We stack the place with all our images and they're all
yeah,
around.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm that great. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And it's obviously something related to that. But when I was young, I didn't like attention. I still don't like even my own son looking over my shoulder when I'm drawing for some reason, or my daughter, because it unnerves me slightly. I like to be left alone to draw. You know what I mean? I'm in the same room. It doesn't bother me at all, watching television, whatever. But back then, there was no distractions. You'd radio, and that was it. So I'd sit there in a corner and I had a little drawing pad and I'd draw away. And that was my life. I read books and I drew, and I had friends who were like me, one or two of them, who were very Now you call it intellectual. We were curious about science. I used to build rockets. I went in 3 stages way above Griffith Park, the park in Drumcondra.
Yeah,
So, I was pretty busy. I thought I was going to be a scientist. I was really influenced by Jules Verne. But then the art began to take over slowly. And I realized when I loved science, all I knew about art I'd learned from my mother taking me to the National Museum and places like that. Remember, the National Museum is now the Hugh Lane. That was just up the road from Conter. So I'd call in there all the time. And I got absorbed by Harry Clarke and the Geneva Window,
yeah,
which logged off with him for pittance. And that was one of the greatest piece of artwork in European history. There's no doubt about that.
yeah. That's the
And
one that
last,
features James Joyce and
yeah,
other great
Liam
luminaries of.
Flaherty, all the
Yeah.
gang. That was the problem with it. It featured Irish writers that the government, Cosgrave and then De Valera or vice versa, disapproved of. So
Mm,
Harry Clarke never got paid. He died of consumption, stressed out of his fucking brain in debt.
yeah,
And what age? I think he was very young anyway. Same as Beardsley, who died at 27, but Clarke, I think, was about 36. But the point I'm making is, even then, artists were just not regarded as anything substantial. It could be messed with, it could be, changed. And that window was commissioned for the League of Nations in Geneva. And I think it was De Valera took exception to it because there's a naked Deirdre of the Sorrows in it, right? And as a consequence, it never went to the League of Nations, which is the UN today. It stayed in Ireland. It was donated by David Clarke, because I know his daughter Michelle. She was one of my first poster sellers, would you believe, when I started selling posters. So the connection with Harry Clarke is there too.
yeah,
But David Clarke offered it because he was stuck for money to the National Museum, the Hugh Lane Gallery, for 100 grand, and they refused. You know, Now, I don't know if they refused or the government refused. So it's the same old story. So they got rid of it. It's now in the Wolfsonian Institute in Palm Beach, where I went to see it
yeah,
like years ago. The last time I'm ever going to see it. But I just thought that's my debt to society is that I was lucky to be able to walk into a museum as a kid and just stand there looking at this thing, working out the line drawing effect. And if you look at my work, it's all based from those influences, very early influence. My work is line drawing with color in it, and stained glass is line leaded with color added to it. You know what I mean? So you
yeah.
can trace it all back right there.
And so a lot of your work is influenced by Irish mythology.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering, do you remember the time when you first were exposed to the Tuatha Dé Danann or Cú Chulainn and Fionn McCool, and how did how did that exposure eventually end up in your work?
There's a couple of threads. The first one would have to go back. Well, there's two. There's the home, and then there's school, and then there's County Clare. The first thread would have to be home. I knew when I was growing up because I had the books. I actually filmed them yesterday with my son, who makes all these movies for me. And there are 2 volumes of a book called The Leprechaun, a periodical that was published monthly and then bi-monthly by my grandfather, who did all the cartoons, all the writing, everything. And this was from 1890, and then he died in 1912. This day yesterday, actually, in July the 16th, 1912. So his books were there of cartoons. He also had a book that had a huge influence on me called Doré's Gallery. You can Google that. You've seen his work everywhere, except you wouldn't recognize it because it's ripped off by everybody from the 60s. My friend Stanley Mouse uh, did versions of it. My other friend Michael English, all the great psychedelic artists used steel engravings by uh, Doré of like William Blake's poems or Dante's Inferno, and they'd incorporate these into psychedelic posters, right?
Yeah.
Nobody gave a shit about the law of copyright. We all ripped off Mooka. You know what I mean? Stanley Mouse, my mate, did all the Grateful Dead posters. He
Yeah.
did
Uh,
fucking.
I'm glad you said that because that
Ripped
was one of
off.
the questions I was going to ask you.
Oh no, we were ripping off everybody. I didn't know there was such a thing as copyright. Nobody was. We were just free spirits. It was like free love, free art, free fucking everything. So I remember I got really into Jack Kirby much later, again, because of Michael English ripping him off on a poster he did for Hapsash and the Colored Coat for a Jimi Hendrix poster, I think, you know. 'Cause he did all Jimmy's posters, you know.
Yeah.
So going back to the beginning, so you have the influence of my grandfather knowing that he was a famous artist, even though my style is totally different. I was a cartoonist for a while, but that's another story. Then there's the influence of school. I was lucky I had teachers who made, except for one guy, actually, I never forget being whipped with a strap for "Bhí ri in Érenn fado daravanam lir." And he'd say it with a snarl, "Bhí ri in Érenn fado daravanam lir." And if you didn't repeat every line perfectly, and then you step back and say, right, say the whole thing. And of course, none of us had a fucking clue. You know? So that teacher eventually went somewhere else, and I got a man called Mr. Kleins, who was a most wonderful man, very kind man. And he was big into art, and he caught me so many times drawing when I should have been fucking listening that he just said to me, just carry on, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Don't let me draw. And then one day he caught me and was really impressed. I'd gone to the movie in the Drumcondra Grand of The Robe, very famous film back then. A bit like the Ten Commandments, except Charlton Heston wasn't in it. It was Victor Mature, who was the worst and unlikeliest fucking, Roman general you can imagine. But I can't remember who played Christ, but it was the story of the crucifixion. And I made a comic book on brown paper because we don't read paper even then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My first tracing paper was toilet paper in Gormanston College because it was Bronco toilet paper and it made great for tracing. It was stiff, rigid, it wasn't soft,
Yeah.
like wax paper nearly, can you imagine? Now I think, how do we even say
I,
clean back
I,
then?
I, I can imagine because I think we had the same toilet paper when I was in St. Vincent's primary school.
Oh,
Um,
you went to Vincent's. That
I
was
went
a
to
hot
Vincent's
mess.
as
We
well.
were
Yeah.
we were told to avoid that because one of the guys in the house, I was a lodger, went down. He was coming back black and blue.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that it wasn't rough when I was there, but I only went to the primary school, not the
I was
secondary.
probably more civilized by the time you got there.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
This is 1950, fucking 50, 51, 52, 53.
Yeah. So probably they were a little bit more calmer, let's say.
Yeah, no, no, our school was very organized. I really enjoyed St. Pat's. I've nothing but great memories of it, even though I ended up on the end of a strap too many times.
Yeah.
And Ghost was the same. We had a guy, the Dean of Discipline, who had a fucking strap that gave us a whack, and I remember Mr. Klein saying to me, Mr. Fitzpatrick, this will hurt me more than it hurts you.
Yeah. But he wasn't on the
It hurt me.
receiving end of it, was he?
Hold on for a second.
Your man's here with the cows.
Oh, yeah, I have to duck out for a second, sign something for
Yeah.
somebody.
No
Just
worries.
stay there. Be back in
Yeah.
2 or 3 minutes.
You were telling me about how you first were inspired by stories about the Tuatha Dé Danann, Cuchulainn, and Fionn McCool. And I believe you were talking about your experience in school. And I think, although I'm not sure, I think you were going to tell me about your experiences in County Clare.
Yeah. I At the age of 13, there was an outbreak of polio in 1956 in Dublin. I had, I was only a couple of months recovered from TB. I was in Peamount Sanatorium, one of the few survivors of my age.
Wow.
And my mother was terrified if I got polio to finish me off. So the doctor said, get him out of here. So she sent me down to her relatives in County Clare because the family is from County Clare. And there is when I got really interested in what I call Celtic legend, but not in the academic sense. It was more local folklore, pishogues, leaving milk out at night for the leprechauns or the little people or the fairies, and everything in the landscape was alive. There were fairy bushes. You know what I mean? I slept under a fairy tree one night. I had never had the freedom I had down there in Dublin. I couldn't go sideways. If I was going into the park, I had to know when I was going, when I'd be back, everything. You had to be careful.
Yeah.
But there, I could roam the fields and nobody noticed me except cows. And I had a cow that I used to sit on. You know what I mean? I had pigs that I used to play with, goats. I'd sit still in a little glade down by the river just to see the stoats. There was one of those red stoats with the white. I think they're stoats are pine. They're not pine martens. Pine martens are dark. I only saw one pine marten, but there was a stoat that came regularly. So my aunt was imbued with all these stories, and then her father lived in this house in Kilmaley. We went to visit him, and he was telling stories of the Tuatha Dé Danann, but they were the fairy folk. It wasn't the quasi-historical people. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, I could go into the genetics of the whole thing. I don't want to bore you, but I've studied the whole genetics of how this all works. And back then, I was fascinated by the idea that Ireland was populated by peoples of this extraordinary mystical kind of temperament, and that they had given us a mythology, a pantheon that was older than anything the Greeks had come up with. And we really knew nothing about it. So when I was in school, I was kind of edgy. I loved history, still do. But I wanted to know about the very early stuff. But there was a paragraph in the book, in the history books, that kind of got me going as well. So I started, even in school, when I'd be on my summer halls or winter or breaks, I'd go down to Fred Hanna's bookshop or down to Keys. And it was all old history books there. Sorry, that's my cat and the seagull. Uh, I was always interested in the possibility of there being any kind of reality behind all these myths and legends. And that just grew. So it grew out of three sources, essentially. My childhood, the fact that I had a grandfather who was, at that time, would have been a famous, very famous cartoonist and artist. Uh, then you had, nationalism thrown in there as well, which you won't get into. You had all the feeling that there was something mystical about this island of saints and scholars. But I wasn't very interested in saints and scholars for a while. I am now, because the saints are just as magical as anything ever
Of
invented.
course.
They
Yeah.
dominant. One saint had 8 breasts and he could feed a multitude. You know what I mean? That was just in Kilkenny. But I love all that kind of lore where we have all these Christian ideologies and there's simply a layer of paganism underneath them. Like Saint Anne, the mother of Jesus, is not Saint Anne. She's Anya, the goddess, a fertility goddess. And we recognize Saint Anne's wells as Anya's wells, even though they're Christianized to Saint Anne's. So when you're watching people, and there's plenty of people who do it, tying all the little ribbons and all, especially travelers who are really still into the old culture, you are looking at something that, for instance, the Incas and any of the older cultures of the world did, which is find a sacred space. They divined it with water diviners as we did. You find a place with some kind of strange magnetic energy, it becomes a religious site. And then over generations, it goes from being Anya's well of fertility to Saint Anne's well, the mother of Jesus. You know what I mean? Or the sister of Jesus, or whatever way they want to word all these things. They bring in the Christian pantheon of gods and goddesses into the old religion, simply rename it and make it Christian, which is the secret of St. Patrick's success. He came here, right?
Yeah.
A fairly crazy man, if you read about him. He was known as Axed or Azid. Azid, the Azid is an axe made of Azid, and it's a sort of sharp thing. And he was known as Ad's face. He had an axe face.
Mm.
You know what I mean? A bit like Sean Kelly. The cyclist. He has a
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
like you wouldn't want to.
Pointed
You don't
face.
get in his way. Put it
Yeah.
that way. And
Hmm.
Patrick was the same. He was ferocious. But he brought back to Ireland a different kind of Christianity. He realized Christianity, as he knew it, was not suitable for the people of Ireland. They had an entire cohesive system of beliefs. So he simply re engineered Christianity to fit the myths. The story of the Shamrock is a classic. The
Yeah.
three in one. The Bob, the Morrigan, the great goddesses were three in one. The gods are three in one. And here he was explaining to people who knew what a triple goddess was that there was a God they could worship who was also three in one, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost back then. So all these legends seeped into me through all the different sources, and something at the end of it came out as a total fucking obsession. That's the only way to describe it. I decided I was going to bring the Tuatha Dé Danann back to life, not literally, but on the pages.
Yeah.
And I started doing everything from publishing books. I even wrote books, The Silver Arm and the Book of Conquests. And what's great about it is, for some reason, I hit an audience that was always there, but hadn't been fed.
Yes.
Like academics, were wonderful. They knew all these stories inside out, going back to Kuno Mer and all the great people who translated the epics in the previous century, in the 1800s, right up to the 1940s. And then we had the Irish Academy, where they published all the Irish Text Society books, translations of all the annals, everything like this. I have them all. Every penny I made in advertising when I worked on it, I spent on books, on academic books, and I still have them. And to cut a long story short, the obsession never goes away. It's still there. I always feel, even at 81, I'm doing one last great one. And I am. I'm doing one last great Celtic painting. Whether it'll be great is another day's work, but I have the face drawn and it looks good, you know? So once
Excellent.
the face drawn, I'm happy with it. I think, yeah, let's go with this. Yeah. So I just want to do one
Yeah.
last real good epic.
I'm just sitting here smiling because a lot of what you're saying resonates with my own experience. I can remember being in school, learning history for the first time, and obviously, well, in those early days, they wouldn't teach you history; they would teach you mythology and say it's history.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so I was learning about the salmon of knowledge, and
Yeah,
I was learning about Fionn McCool and Cú Cullen with his hurl and his schlitter, and the Tuatha Dé Danann. And can you imagine how disappointed I was in the following year when I actually started learning real history?
yeah.
I ended up loving history, so that grew on me. But I was so disappointed because I felt like I was sold a bill of goods that wasn't actually what it was
Well,
purporting to
that's what happened
be.
to me in secondary school when I went to Gormanston, and we sat down to do our new history book, and I looked through it, and there's like that much
Yeah.
about the entire genetic history of Ireland
Yeah.
that
Do you want to
hasn't
get into
changed.
that?
Hmm?
Do you want to get into that?
Oh, do my cousin is Aoife McLysaght, who's on a stamp. She's
Oh, that's interesting. Is she related to
the other McLysaght, yeah,
the other
grand
Mac Lysa? Because I was
granddaughter.
um
Oh no, her no, the famous McLysaght would be her grandfather.
Lawrence, is it? Lawrence MacLysite or
No,
something
it
like that.
wasn't. What was it called? Not quite. I have
I
his
have the
book.
book over on my shelf here, The Surnames of Ireland.
That's it. Yeah,
That's it,
absolutely.
yeah.
But no, Aoife is a geneticist, and she put me in touch with Dr. Lara Cassidy, who's the top geneticist in the country, in Europe, probably. And she's the only person ever allowed do DNA in the bones found at Newgrange. And she traced them. I won't go into all the details. I was redhead. I'm a 6-footer with long legs and all the rest of it. And that is exactly what she found at Newgrange, as I expected, because I know who these people are. And she was able to trace that route genetically back to where it says it came from in the Andals, Scythia, Anatolia,
Hmm.
steppes, that area.
That's interesting because
After the Younger Dryas from about 11,000 years ago, perhaps. So Irish history may be a lot older than we think it is. Newgrange is, what, 5,000 years old, but there's an old foundation there. The sticks, the posts, the holes for the posts, everything is still there. Now with the summer, that was about 2 or 3 years ago, where everything went dry. A friend of mine found a whole new fucking.
yeah, that was Anthony Murphy, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's the guy who did it there.
Flying the drones, Mythical Ireland.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's fascinating, and I wonder if you um, have you come across in your research any suggestions to say that Irish culture is a lot older than what the academics have said?
Well, from what Lara Cassidy told me, she's not making any claim. She simply says the bones come. They were
Yeah.
Quranic in the sense that they were incestuous. That was part of the belief system of the royal
Yes,
families of the period. They probably, I'm speculating because I'm presuming it all came from Egypt through whether
that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think
because no, I was
is it
taken down to the
connected to
National
Egypt?
Museum when they found the bog bodies, and they showed me the manuscript they found the bog, and explained to me that it was papyrus holding it together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
remember thinking that fits exactly what we know. There was long,
Exactly.
long association between the Coptic Church and the Irish Celtic Church, and before that, Egyptians. We have in our history the
Mm.
story of Tuatha. who gives her
Jota,
name our
exactly. Yeah.
place,
So
probably
the last couple of people, well, you asked me who did I interview before we came on, and um, one man that I've interviewed recently is Luke Eastwood, and he wrote a book called Scotia, the Lost Daughter of Tutankhamun, or something
want
like
to
that,
read that. I
or the
can't find
sister.
that book anywhere.
I can send it to you.
I'd love a copy. I'd
Yeah.
pay for it happily.
Um, and then I also interviewed Kieran McMahon, and he's joined the Brehon Academy team, and he is very much on this. He's done his DNA and he's checked where he comes from, and he has a link to Egypt, and he has a link to other people as well, such as Brian Boru, which you would expect being from being a McMahon from that part of the world.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because, like, if you were to go back 50 years ago, then it's much easier to dismiss these theories. But now, as science has advanced,
Possible, yeah. You can prove it with DNA.
we can prove it with DNA.
What
Exactly.
staggered me was when she said, they come from Anatolia. I said, is that old Scythia about party? And she said, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Which
it's
is
the fucking
modern day
album.
Turkey for the listeners.
I was writing the thing for my son yesterday on Nama the Great because we don't have a listing in a website for it. We haven't even got it up. And Nema the Great, it says, came with a fleet of 34 transports and 1,000 followers from Scythia after an argument with his family there or something. And it
Yeah,
lists who everybody is.
yeah.
And then, of course, he's beaten by the indigenous Irish. We call them the Formor now. But they were Moorish people from North Africa who
Yes.
colonized Ireland. And they were indigenous by the time these new invaders like myself came along.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stories there. You have to be careful.
And
The portrayal of the Fomorians as one-legged, one-eyed, semi-mythical monsters.
what I find interesting about the Nemedians is that that is the word that we used to describe the noble classes later in Irish history, the
Yeah,
Med. And
yeah.
that's also where we get the root word nave, which is saint or holy, you
Oh,
know?
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
when you're saying the Med, it makes me think of the sacred ones.
Yeah.
Like these people, and this would have been known to our ancestors. Okay, we don't have all of the information now, but when they are speaking Irish and then they refer to a group of people as Nemed, and they would have had it in their mind that they're saying something sacred or holy.
Right.
And I'm not sure, I'm sure you have come across this as well, that the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Firbolgs both descend from Nemed,
Yeah.
but they went to different parts of the world
Yeah.
and they eventually came back. So that's a very interesting piece of our I don't want to say our history, but our past.
Yeah. But the great thing about DNA is that we're finding out about everything, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, excuse me. It really is quite amazing. I'm going to have to go shortly. What time are we on? 3 o'clock, okay with you?
3 o'clock is perfect, yeah. So let's go through the next couple of questions then, a bit more fluid and a bit more quickly, okay? So I want to talk about the Book of Conquests, which is your artistic interpretation of the Book of Invasions, but specifically the Tuatha Dé Danann and their battle with the Firbolg. And you also wrote the Silver Arm and other mythological works, but let's just focus on the Book of Conquest at the moment. Can you
Yeah.
talk to me about what drew you to this particular cycle of Irish mythology, and how did you decide which moments to illustrate?
I'm very lucky that my career didn't go the way I tried to make it go. And I ended up doing a book like the Book of Conquests almost accidentally because I was working with Peter Fallon and Eamon Carr went on to found Horselips in a beat group called Tara Telephone. And that was the direction I was going in. I was using all these psychedelic images and putting in bits about, greetings from the Tuatha Dé Danann and, all kinds of shit thrown in there because I was trying to get the message out that by constantly referring to this mythical race, people might pick up on it and make it a kind of an interesting thing. And then I'd get a comic strip in the Sunday Independent, which fucking blew my mind because I realized I'd never want to be a comic book artist. I I had working 24/7 to produce one page of a comic book every week. I'd never been under such pressure in my fucking life, and it wasn't like it paid well, you know. But
Yeah.
again, it was this thing I had in my head of popularizing this idea of the mythology, and that was it. I decided not to do that, and I started doing posters. I did the Children of Lear, and I sent them all out in a package using the Artists and Writers Yearbook because I was broken, I needed money, and I had a family to feed. And I got nothing but rejection slips or even not even acknowledgements. But Alan Aldridge, the artist, suddenly rang me out of nowhere. He was one of my heroes. He was the creative director of Penguin Books. He had done the Beatles songbooks. He was doing all kinds of extraordinary work using airbrush work with a guy called Harry Willico. I got to know all these guys later. And he was representing me. I did work with a company of English publishers called Motif Editions. Another one, I did a series of posters with for Kirk in Holland. And this was all leading up to something. I didn't know what. And in the middle of it all, I got a message from Roger Dean, the S artist, whose work I loved. Even Nemeth explained the little commentary I made yesterday. That image is probably the one that's most influenced by Roger Dean because it has a lot of his elements in it. As does the Thin Lizzy album cover Nightlife, where I used kind of Roger Deany lettering. So I was very inspired by Roger before I met him. And then he wanted me to join him on a publishing venture. He was setting up a company called Dragon's Dream. They eventually morphed into a company called Paper Tiger. A long story cut short, he flew me up to London, drew up a contract with the publisher, Herbert Schaff's Paper Tiger it became, because Roger decided he didn't like the way it was going and left. But they published the Book of Conquests, and the Book of Conquests took me 2 years' work of research. I mean, I moved to America in the middle, but I was lugging a big suitcase full of academic books. There was no, email or, USB thing stuck in the computer and got all the information. You lugged it around. And between the jigs and the reels, I came back. I decided I didn't want to live in America, came back, and I produced a silver arm. So I had two books in succession. There was a third one due, but then the company went bust, owing me like 17 grand, which was a fortune at the time,
The,
like a
the, the
shit load of
third one,
money.
I think, was planned to be called The Son of the Sun. Is
Son
that?
of the Sun, absolutely.
Yeah,
One of my ambitions is to bring the whole story of the Egyptians and the Semites and the Hebrews and put them all into context.
yeah,
Because, there's a war going on in Gaza at the moment. Why are we so sympathetic? Maybe look at your blood. From what I've read and the DNA, we are pretty well a Semitic race. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Anyway, we won't go into all that.
No,
But yeah, oh, it's
haven't
on my
got
mind.
time for that.
Yeah, people take great exception to that,
Yeah,
especially
I
when it's
know.
like Palestine, they can't understand it, but it's
Yeah,
genetic.
yeah, yeah,
I love all the Hebrew Jews. They're my favorite type of people. But long story cut short, that brought me right into an area where I could sit down, translate all these fucking manuscripts that had already been translated, but I had my own way of just checking that because things get changed in translation and all, and
yeah.
there's like the four masters, like O'Clery had to reprimand one of the scribes for changing the name of Crom, the god Crom, to Mork, M-O-R-C. In other words,
Mm.
Crom backwards. So they thought they were being, because the whole thing of the four annals, but they had to be exact reproductions of the oral tradition. And this guy changed one. And there's an admonition written by O'Clery saying, don't change things. You know what I mean? You must keep them exactly as they are, which went against whoever the scribe was, his religious beliefs. He didn't want to be recording a pagan god that was still all powerful in their minds back then. They were
Yeah.
close to it. And he changed the name to Mork to sort of devalue it.
Mm.
So we're lucky we had people like O'Clery and all the other scribes who transcribed everything fanatically faithfully. That's why we have so much good material.
And did you feel a sense of responsibility then to be true to the annals and true to the oral and written histories of Ireland?
Well, I tell you, I am fanatic about keeping everything exactly as the translation without changing facts. But I admonish myself because I remember one line I put in, I won't even tell you what it is. That just came out of my head. I thought that sounds really good, and I stuck it in there, you know. And I thought I'm doing exactly what I clearly would have admonished someone for doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it's human nature to add your little piece,
Yeah.
you know, because I thought it enhanced it, which it did. And then I use Yeats to excuse me in the introduction, saying we all deal with stuff and it's our stuff and we're allowed,
Great
reevaluate
license. Yeah.
what we want to do, we like with it, you know. So that's where I was, what, 78, 79. And the books came out, Silver Arm came out, it sold a huge amount. And then what happened? The fucking publisher goes bust, you know?
Yeah. So let's move forward then to because you mentioned a couple of times Thin Lizzy, and I haven't even asked you about the Che Guevara
Yeah.
feature, which
We can
is
go through
probably your
pretty
most
quickly, don't worry.
iconic image that you've created. And from what I heard is that you didn't copyright that image, and
I
that
did. No, I'm a copyright expert. I announced in the Evening Press in 1968. I think Catherine Wynne was the reporter, and she gave me a whole front page, full page in the Evening Press. So that was a big deal for a young artist, you know.
yeah
And then it had grandly announced. Oh, the title was something of a revolutionary, something of a pacifist, or something, you know. And I wanted to stake my revolutionary credentials, high up on the wall. So I announced that this was art for the masses, right? Pure Marxist talk. Art for the masses, the proletariat. And I was quite fanatical. I mean, I was one of the occupiers of Hume Street, so I was no slouch,
yeah
before I became a pacifist. I had to become a pacifist. But even in Hume Street, I enjoyed the fucking fights. We had vicious fights. You know what I mean? I slammed a guy in the head with a spade. I stopped him breaking. He was smashing down this beautiful Georgian, what's they call that? The place work where it's on blue Wedgwood. There was Wedgwood work on the walls, and this guy was fucking knocking it down, you know? Don't
yeah.
get me. He deserved what he got. Anyway, uh,
Just for
how much
disclaimer
for the
purposes,
proletariat wouldn't have
just
got a whack
just
on
for
the fucking
disclaimer
head.
purposes in Minecraft, right?
Yeah.
All right. So this is probably going to be the last question,
So
and then
anyway, just to get on
go
to that,
on. Yeah,
that's
go
what
on.
radicalized me. And I realized I was on the other side. I was on the side of all these students, right? I was on the side of people who were trying to stop housing. I got involved with the Workers' Party through a magazine called Hibernia. I did free posters for them. But in 1961, I met Che Guevara. Sorry, that's my cat. Che
You
Guevara.
met Che Guevara.
Yeah. I was
Wow.
working at the bar in Kilkee, the Royal Marine Hotel.
So he visited Ireland, did he?
He was here a lot. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Quite a
because
lot.
I know I know he had Irish roots
Yeah.
because his I believe his full name is Che Guevara Lynch.
That's right. Yeah.
And I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I remember reading that his father said the reason why my son is a revolutionary is because the blood of the Irish rebels flows through his
Absolutely.
veins.
Yeah. I used that. I did a stamp. I was amazed the Irish State commissioned a stamp of Che Guevara.
Yeah,
Well, I used that quote from his dad. In my son's veins run the blood of the Irish rebels. Because, and I have it somewhere in my files, I keep everything. When he was murdered, the Evening Press were the first ones to have it on Irish newspapers. And across the banner, it was Guevara Lynch saying, in my son's veins, the very quote, because I was one of the few people who knew he was Irish because he told me he was Irish. Now, George Mackay, who's head of the Irish Ireland Day Association, McAllister, the footballer for Liverpool, he's part of that now.
no, it wouldn't really be a big
He's a World
Scots
Cup winner
fan.
with Argentina. He's
Yeah,
big news. He's the best player in the world in midfield, probably. But I used to work in McAllister's Farms. It's from Portrand. That's where he's from. But anyway, Jorg is like Shay. Jorg is totally Argentinian, 4 generations, but he's totally Irish, 100% Irish. They still speak Gaelic. You know what I mean?
interesting.
Argentine Irish associations that are stronger now than they ever were, thanks to the
Yeah,
internet. So when Che Guevara told me he was Irish, I didn't know what he was talking about. First of all, I thought he was Cuban, right? Now, I knew all about the Cuban Revolution because the priests were full on fanatic for it. I went to a Franciscan college where we had missionaries working in
yeah,
all of Latin America. They knew how corrupt it all was. Father Brendan Ford was he was 2 classes ahead of me, I think, and he became one of the great missionaries in Colombia. He formed what's called the peace villages, where got FARC out of the villages and they got the paramilitaries and the fucking mass murderers out of the villages. And they were villages where no one with a weapon could enter. And that had huge consequences. He was threatened, he was assaulted, all kinds of stuff. But he won in the end, you know, he got the respect of the international community and protection, you know.
Yeah.
So the monks I was with, the friars and the Franciscans, were very, very, I would call today radical by today's standards. I mean, the founder of liberation theology is Father Leonardo Boff, another Franciscan who was booted out by Pope, the Polish guy, Wojtyla. And he's now going to be regarded as a saint. But Che Guevara turned out to be Argentinian, he explained to me, and he was Irish, he explained to me. So I learned a lot about a small section of the Irish diaspora in about 5 seconds flat than I learned in a lifetime, because that got me going, you know. So long story cut short, when he was murdered years later, I was working for Hibernian magazine I wrote a review of his diaries, but they gave me a couple of bob and I used that money to make phone calls right across Europe and into Latin America. And I spoke to Michelle Roy, the reporter, and got the exact story of how Mario Turan was sent in by Rodriguez, the CIA guy who was responsible for the murder of Kennedy, who was supposed to be murdering Castro, not Che. And Rodriguez sent Mario Turan in with a gun and told him to shoot Guevara, but not in the face. They wanted his face recognizable. And Guevara said to him when he was shaken, you know, be a man, just get it over with.
Yeah.
But they had to get 2 doctors in to shoot him in the throat to stop him. He was still alive, drowning in his own blood.
Yeah.
So
I
he was
believe his I
put on a
believe
slab.
his last words were something like, What are you afraid of? You're only going to kill a man."
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. You know, Lady Guevara, his daughter, told me a very interesting story when I was with her. I brought her down to Kilkee. And she told me that Mario Turan, the year before, had turned up. You know, there's thousands of Cuban doctors right across Latin America. Turned up in Venezuela. An older man, 60 or something, 70, with cataracts in his eye. And he went into a Cuban clinic, right, to get free, you know, eye surgery. And they recognized him, right?
Mm,
And they still did it.
yeah.
You know, he still got his free eye surgery, you know, and they knew it was the man who shot Che, you know. But he was a kid who was told to, they got him drunk and sent him in there with a gun. I
Yeah.
wouldn't blame him for anything, you know.
Okay, well, look, I'm just conscious of the time and I don't want to keep you, but I feel like we could talk for hours and hours. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. I don't
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. I'd be quite happy to, you know.
Excellent. So I'm sure I can like tell my audience like where to find you if they don't know already. But Jim Fitzpatrick, this has been an absolute pleasure meeting you first of all, and then hearing all of these stories has been just a joy for me. And so I just want to say thank you very much, and I would say Slán Fall as well.
Wonderful. Blah, blah, blah. Cheers.
There you have it, folks. I feel like we could have went on for another 4 or 5 hours, but Jim had to go, and he did say that he would be happy to come back on and speak to me again in the future, and by proxy, you guys. So I'm really looking forward to that. And if you have any questions for Jim, pop them in the comments box below. And once I get him back on, I'll make a list of those questions and I'll ask him. I guarantee you, I will ask him those questions. Now, before we go, just to remind you once again to check out the breenacademyorg. That's where you're going to find all of my online courses, and you can get access to all three of them for the price of two. So that's three of them for I think 49.95 or something like that. Help us get to 30,000 subscribers. We're very, very close to getting 30,000 subscribers. So if you want to be one of the ones that are in the pre 30,000 club, then please click subscribe to this channel and tell your friends as well. We are also on social media, so check us out on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, and on YouTube. And if you're not subscribed, please click subscribe now. I really enjoyed this conversation and I hope you did too. And until next time, my friends, slán go fóill.